Tonight on Dr. Phil Primetime. You woke up with somebody in your bed on top of you.
The way that the police acted, I thought that I had done something wrong.
You have filed a lawsuit against the police department for how they handled this case.
There's no other crime where your sexual history is put on display.
As difficult and as painful as it is, it has to be vetted.
Did you actually have procedures done so if this happened again, you wouldn't wind up with a rapist baby? From the very beginning, over 2 decades ago, I've always promised to discuss the silent epidemics in this country. The issues that leave so many suffering in isolation and afraid to seek help. And tonight's topic is very consistent, right on point. Shockingly, every 68 seconds, someone 12 years old or older is sexually assaulted in this country. That's nearly 500,000 children, mothers, sisters, and friends. To put it in perspective, that's enough survivors to fill nearly 11 baseball stadiums. But sadly, due to the stigma, shame, victim blaming, and embarrassment that many often feel, nearly 70% of these inhumane assaults are never even reported to the police. And you know what's worse? Even when a woman is courageous enough to come forward, they rarely get justice because the incarceration rate of these violent perpetrators is less than 3%. That leaves over 450,000 sexual assault predators walking free on our streets, in our communities, right now. My first guest, Julianne, says she was sound asleep in the comfort of her bed when unknowingly an intruder broke into her home, made his way towards her bedroom. Then the unthinkable happened. Julianne was violently awakened by a predator sexually assaulting her while she desperately screamed for help. She says she's here tonight to share her story of survival so she can help others begin to heal.
The evening I was sexually assaulted was very traumatizing. It was around 2:30 or 3 in the morning. I woke up and there was a man on top of me. I started screaming. My roommate was tied up and could hear me screaming. My life was never the same after that night because it happened in my home, in my bed when I was asleep. I never sleep well again. I wake up soaked in sweat and having nightmares every night. The one place you're supposed to feel safest is your home. And when that's taken away from you, where do you feel safe? It changes you in ways that you wouldn't expect. I always want to have a certain amount of light at all times. There's never a feeling of safety. From the night it happened, I started staying with a friend of mine, and I was never alone. I don't go anywhere after dark. Even though my assault happened in my home, I know a lot of women that have been assaulted because they went out alone and a man saw them as a target and drugged them. I am constantly thinking about protecting myself. Looking in the back seat, carrying a weapon on your keychain, doing the self-defense classes. Think what you're wearing, like, can I be strangled with this? Analyzing where I am, what's around me, where the escape route is. I have to be seated a certain way. I don't like crowds. I used to be fun. I don't have relationships with men anymore. I removed any chance of ever having children because I would rather never ever have a child than have a rapist's baby. I'll never get married because I don't trust men.
Julianne, thank you for being here. And I don't mean just thank you for being here. I mean, thank you for choosing to be here and talk about this because it would be a lot easier not to, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Why did you decide to do this?
I think that this is a topic that really needs to be brought to light because there's so much that people don't know about how the criminal justice system treats women. I just think it's really important that we start discussing this on a broader scale.
I don't think it's healthy to ask someone that's been through what you've been through to relive the details of something, but I'm not going to ask you to do that now.
I appreciate that.
But what I do want to talk about is how you felt after the fact. At some point, the event itself ended, but the trauma just began. Correct.
I think initially I was really in denial in a very strange way where because you're asleep. So you kind of hope maybe it's a dream and that it's not really happening. But even that night at the hospital, I was like, maybe this didn't happen. Maybe, and it's very strange, psychologically you have this cognitive dissonance, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Of like, your bed's the safe place, your home is your safe place, and it had been a really chill evening. My roommate and I played some music, we went to bed, and then you wake up with this violent attack. And, she was screaming, I was screaming. She was tied up in her room, so she couldn't help me. But then when the police came in, they kicked down the door. They were screaming and yelling at us. They pointed guns at us. They wouldn't let me put clothes on. I was like just in a robe. They made me go to the hospital without clothes, which was completely unnecessary. They acted like they were really angry to be there. So because of the way the situation escalated and the way that the police acted, I thought that I had done something wrong. Maybe I did mess up. Like, what did I do? I didn't understand why they were treating me that way. Just like, well, why do you live in this neighborhood? Why did you walk home? What were you wearing?
Were you offended by the question
Yes.
in the moment?
Yes. I told them what I was wearing. I said, but I don't know why that would matter. It didn't feel like they were asking me because they wanted to investigate. It felt very much like we're asking you because what did you do to bring this on?
I would not be stupid enough to ever tell you I know how you feel. I will tell you I've talked to a lot of sexual assault survivors, and one of the things they've told me after the fact is that one of their reactions was to kind of knee-jerk run from their femininity, try to hide it. Did you have that reaction? Did you actually have procedures done so if this happened again, you wouldn't wind up with a rapist baby?
I was not okay after my sexual assault. I started wearing all black and shaving my head. It was kind of a way to feel like I disappeared. I wanted to not be in my body. I had this violent crime committed against me, but also hating it for being small, for not being strong enough. It does make you hate yourself.
I will tell you I've talked to a lot of sexual assault survivors, and one of the things they've told me after the fact is that one of their reactions was to kind of knee-jerk run from their femininity, try to hide it. Did you have that reaction?
Oh God, yeah. I just pushed it down. I pretended like it didn't happen. 2 or 3 weeks later, I shaved my head bald, which you don't do if you're in cosmetology school. It's actually against the rules. I started wearing pants, which I never did. I hated pants. I always wore dresses and skirts amongst my friends, the few people that knew. There was kind of a pre-break-in life and a post-break-in life. And I said, well, I think I handled it really well, all things considered. And 2 of my girlfriends just went like, did you though? Did you really? And I was like, yeah, I didn't miss work. I didn't miss school. And they were like, but you shaved your head and you lost, because I abandoned my apartment because, the police kicked down the door, so I couldn't go back. They didn't care to repair it either. So I left.
It wasn't a safe
everything.
zone anymore.
No, I couldn't even go in to get my things. I ended up losing all my records, all my books, a lot of my clothes, my furniture. I just kind of left everything because I couldn't shut the door. So you don't want to go back in a place if you're afraid somebody's going to walk back in.
Did you actually have procedures done so if this happened again, you wouldn't wind up with a rapist baby?
I did. I had my tubes removed, tubal ligation. Because when Roe fell, I was concerned that, after I'd gone to therapy, it's like, what if this happened to me again? Would I have the emotional wherewithal to get myself to another state?
Was your therapist okay with you doing that?
Yeah, and we talked about, the sadness of saying, well, then the door is closed. I'll never have children, but I would rather never have children than be forced to have the child of a rapist. I don't want to be tied to a violent criminal for the rest of my life.
But did y'all discuss that a lot of this was a backhanded way of you owning what happened to you?
I think it was taking control.
Well, it was also saying, I got to change what I'm doing because I must have had some ownership in this. I'm shaving my head, I'm wearing pants, I'm doing things differently. You can interpret that as saying, I must have done something to contribute to this, so I'm going to change what I'm doing. Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, if 10 was you had as full a recovery as could ever be expected from something like this, where would you place yourself today?
Today, I would say I'm probably about a 7, but I would say within 5 years of it happening, I was a 1 or a 2. It was just getting worse over the years.
Are you in therapy today?
Yes.
Same therapist?
Different therapist.
Next, Julianne says her attacker was never identified or apprehended. So whoever did this to her could very well be walking free among us. There wasn't the best investigation done at the time. We'll talk about all that after the break. You hear sometimes people say, brave survivors. But when you have someone that's been through what she's been through, and they have the resolve and the commitment to get out of their pattern, get out of their life, go on in front of millions of people and talk about something that they've spent a lot of time trying to put in their rearview mirror. When something like that happens, does that bring all of this alive for you again?
Absolutely. Because like most women, I read a lot, or went through a period where I read a lot of true crime. And what we do know about men that commit sexual assault, that rape women, is that they are habitual and that oftentimes it leads to more and more serious crimes. If they start fearing getting caught, that's when they start killing women.
And when you see these things reoccur, which as we say, they occur every 68 seconds, so it's in the media, you can never escape from it, reminders of it. Julianne says this monster remains free to offend again because the police failed her in every possible way. Take a look.
The night of the assault, when the police broke in, they were very aggressive. They busted down the door, screaming, yelling, guns pulled out, guns drawn at us, and they wouldn't let me put on clothes. The police there seemed irritated and angry, and like they just really didn't want to be there. And they didn't fingerprint, they didn't collect evidence, they didn't do anything. They asked me why I walked home, what I was wearing when I walked home. It's the only crime where you can say, well, maybe you're lying, maybe you deserved it. There's always this shame. I gave my statement. They said, if we find something, we'll let you know. They didn't want me calling them. Later, I found out that they had DNA evidence, and they just never bothered to let me know. I just want the criminal justice system to start treating this horrible, sexually violent crime like a crime. That's a person's life that is irrevocably damaged and destroyed, and it needs to be taken seriously.
Now, you have filed a lawsuit against the police department for how they handled or mishandled this case more accurately. And by the way, we reached out to them for a statement, and as of this taping, they haven't responded, although they've had adequate time to do so. What do you allege in your lawsuit, generally speaking?
It was a class action lawsuit, and we alleged that we were discriminated against due to our gender, because the only prosecution that had occurred in years would be a man against a man. Every time it was a man against a woman, a man raping a woman, no conviction. They had the DNA backlog and then the defunct DNA lab because they let everything mold and they weren't testing anything. Then they were using what was called exceptional clearance. It's a tactic used by the FBI. Let's say, it's a mob case and the key witness is murdered. It's going to be exceptional clearance because they can no longer continue to pursue the case. They were using that to clear cases to keep their case clearance low. And when you take into consideration that the police told me, if you don't know who he is, we can't really help you. Then if I know him, it's not a crime. If I don't know him, you can't help me. So we're just gonna let this continue to occur. And I realized, there are thousands of young women on the street every Friday, Saturday night, every night of the week, and they're getting drugged and they're having their lives destroyed, and we have to do something.
You settled the lawsuit, and a public apology was issued. Did you feel some sense of justice, some sense of vindication?
I did.
I'm not saying it made it okay. Nothing's going to make it okay.
Yeah, from when I first started my advocacy, I was with a group, and I remember coming into our first meeting and saying, this is what happened, and telling them, no, you don't understand just how bad this is. How bad the police, they kicked down my door and left me with no place to live. I'm a petite woman, it's not like I'm gonna be out there defending myself. But this was my way of defending myself. And they pretty much told me, you gotta take it down 10 notches, Julianne. No one's gonna believe this. They're not gonna believe how bad it was. And then, of course, later in the lawsuit, we get my police report. They had DNA evidence. They never called me back. They never tested it.
They never ran it through the system?
No.
And have they now?
They closed my case. So, and if you take into consideration that my dog was stolen a week before, my roommate was tied up, which has always terrified me, because why did they do that unless they didn't want her to help me? What were they gonna do to her? What were they gonna do to me if she wouldn't have called the police when she did?
Yeah.
And that terrifies me to think that this very much looked premeditated. And I'm the exception, not the rule. Most women that are sexually assaulted by someone they know. I was not. Even when I fit into all of the things that they want, right? It was a break-in, you didn't know him, we have DNA evidence, which they call the law and order effect. Why didn't you investigate it? They didn't fingerprint, they didn't take evidence, they didn't take statements, they didn't ask anybody. So when do they investigate a sexual assault?
Well, we're going to talk about that because we're going to add to this conversation a sexual assault advocate who says there is a list of reasons why women refuse to come forward. We're going to add her to the conversation right after the break.
It was not your fault. It just wasn't. And I know that's hard to process, especially when you've been telling yourself that it was, but it was not your fault.
I just hope that speaking my truth enables someone else to do the same.
Healing is possible, and I, like every other SA survivor, deserve a life of hope and presence and love. And I really hope that you find that.
Those brave women you just listened to are using social media to empower survivors of sexual assault to come forward. Now, my next guest, Rhea Story, has dedicated her life as an advocate for sexual assault survivors, including speaking on Capitol Hill and being a member of the Georgia statewide Human Trafficking Task Force. Please welcome Rhea Story. Thank you for being here. There's a long list of why women don't come forward. And you hear them all.
Absolutely. The number one reason I hear is fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of what's going to happen, fear of the consequences, fear of the shame of being judged or criticized or blamed.
Yeah. It's not something that people feel comfortable talking about happening. You know, we've made a list of why people give for not reporting this, the fear that they're not going to be believed, retribution or retaliation, being re-victimized by the criminal justice system, which you certainly felt.
Absolutely.
Being ostracized, judged, blamed, not having an advocate there for everyone to kind of walk them through the system and say, look, this isn't you, this is the system. shame and embarrassment, and then the trauma of retelling this over and over and over. One of the things about PTSD, and I do a lot of work with school shooting victims and that sort of thing, I just hate to see these documentaries where they get some child that survived and have them go through every single detail of what happened when they were in the... I'm like, what are you people doing? You're etching this in the brain of this child so you can sensationalize this story. But that's exactly what happens when you have to tell the police, the investigators, your attorney, a forensic expert, then you get cross-examined. Before long, it's just part of your DNA, it's part of your identity, and that's not good. What do you tell women when they face this long litany of challenges?
First, it's important to know that what happens to us impacts us and influences us, but it doesn't have to define us. It's going to impact you, and in a lot of different ways, and you don't always know that even at the time. But don't let it ruin the rest of your life.
I've talked to so many survivors of these things that didn't realize what a grip it had on them until they got into a relationship and it reared its ugly head. Or they had children and their child got to the age to start dating and have a relationship, and they just totally had anxiety attacks and panic attacks about what their child might be experiencing. Something that had been festering for 20 years comes back up, and it's just been there all that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's the little things that you don't necessarily expect that bring it to life as well. And sometimes those are almost triggering moments in and of themselves, unexpected occurrences or something like that that you don't expect, that you don't plan for.
Is there something that needs to happen or is happening within law enforcement to have advocates for those that come in and need someone to say, all right, look, we're going to walk you through this with dignity. We're going to protect your privacy. You're going to have to answer questions. You are. These are allegations until they're proven, but that doesn't mean you have to be beat up along the way.
I think there is some work in that space, but I don't think there's enough. I think in general, many women who do find the courage to report don't understand that there's not a lot of clarity around the process of what reporting looks like, what would happen if this goes to an actual trial. And that was the case for me. There could be a lot more clarity around that process, certainly.
A criminal defense attorney who says it is his duty to challenge everything an accuser claims when it comes to protecting his clients from sexual assault allegations. We're going to add him to the conversation after the break. We're adding to the conversation Daryl Stallworth. He's a criminal defense attorney with over 30 years of experience in the courtroom. Thank you for being here. And the way the system works is, as a defense lawyer, you have an ethical duty to provide your client the most vigorous defense you possibly can. True?
Absolutely. 90 years ago, the California Supreme Court was reviewing a sexual assault case, and they pointed out that this particular charge flips the presumption of innocent to presumptions of guilty because of the difficult layers that are involved. They talked about how the burden shifts from the prosecutor's burden of proving a case beyond a reasonable doubt to a defense attorney having to show that the client's innocent. So I am understanding that and appreciating that over the 30 years I've seen those challenges, and I know that I have to provide a professional, strong challenge to every accusation.
You owe it to your client to do it, and it's unethical if you fail to do so. It's estimated that between 2% and 8% of allegations are false, and when those allegations are false, the consequences can be devastating for the person. But that tells us that 92 to 98% of the allegations turn out to be true if we believe those statistics. Has the system gone too far?
The system requires that those things and those accusations be challenged because the mere statement by someone is never going to be enough by itself to carry a case. And if you don't have a witness, if you don't have circumstantial corroborating evidence, you have to challenge the credibility of that witness. And that requires the level of challenge, questioning the history, the mental state, the timeline, all those things that come into play. These are things that have to be vetted. And I, as a professional, I have to be surgical with it. I have to do those things to make sure that my client is properly represented.
Yeah, if it's a he said, she said.
Challenging the accusation is different than challenging the victim.
I understand that, and I can appreciate that from your perspective, but when a jury has to make a decision on whether or not the accusations are credible and trustworthy, then you have to challenge that person. You have to put into perspective that if someone's making a statement that they saw a green truck down the street, then you've got to ask them, where were you standing? How do you know it was green? What was your mental state like? Do you have a history of not being truthful? These things are things that have to be asked. And I know they're uncomfortable, and I know they're difficult, and I know it's traumatic, but they have to be asked. I've had a number of cases over the years where people have made these accusations, and it turns out that they've talked about things that are impossible. They talked about things that are inconsistent with what they said before. They've said things based on bias or motive that comes back and we find out that they're not being honest or truthful. So as difficult and as painful as it is, it has to be vetted.
I take issue with what you said. You're quoting a statement from the Supreme Court for 80 years ago. You are aware that until 1992 it was legal to rape your wife in this state, right? So when you say that it's guilty until proven innocent, I find that completely the opposite. She's lying until we can prove that she's not.
But when someone's accused of sexual assault, the social media and the public image that presents itself creates this sense of this person being guilty. If you take for 1 second just the idea of what it would be like if you have a son or a nephew, and that person is accused of sexual assault, that person becomes canceled. That person becomes defamed. That person becomes a lot of trauma.
You are conflating what we do in the public eye with what is legally done. There's a very big difference. Okay, there is no legal consequence, but there can be accountability through societal norms. Let's talk about the law, though. What are we doing to actually investigate and prosecute rapists? I consider myself an advocate for in the criminal justice system above all else. Everyone deserves a defense, first of all. But do you really need to bring up everything a person has ever done in their entire life, whether they've ever had, have you ever been to therapy? Oh, then obviously you're unstable.
There's no other crime where your sexual history is put on display as when this is brought out into the open.
Your history of being credible, your history of being truthful is relevant when you're making a sexual assault claim. It doesn't have to be a past sexual relationship. I want to know whether or not you've ever lied about something before. I want to know whether or not you ever made an accusation that's been false. There are false accusations that are being made where people are eventually exonerated. But once that bell is rung, you can't unring it. And what I'm saying from the defense point of view is that it has to be vetted. It cannot just be assumed because the statement is said. Because when you say the word sexual assault and rape, it automatically has a reflection that someone's guilty. It's unlike murder, it's unlike robbery. It requires extra challenges because it creates such a presumption of guilty right from the start.
But if I take your watch off your hand and I say, you gave it to me, are we gonna go to court and they're gonna say, have you ever given anyone anything? Have you ever given a piece of jewelry to someone? Have you ever lied about anything? Because how do we know that you're not lying about this now? Because you've lied at some point in your life. Because that watch, it's not gonna hurt you if I take it off of you. But if you take something off of my body, it does. It hurts me for the rest of my life.
It's exactly what's supposed to happen. Everything that comes through the court, every accusation that's made, every statement that's made has to be challenged. Sexual assault and intimacy is one of the taboos of the society. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about the parameters. Nobody wants to talk about communication. We've got high school kids having sex for the first time. They don't know what they're doing. We've got kids in college thinking that they're being aggressive, but they're being assaulted. This conversation that we're having has to be a conversation that takes place early in everybody's lives. Parents have to talk to their kids. Students have to talk to each other. We have to develop more information so that these tragedies do not exist.
No, I agree with you completely there. And I worked with a lot of young people, and the biggest issue we have is that they don't know consent. And if you're in a state, which I'd like to also mention, that says sex is bad, don't do it, it's evil, I also want to mention that children that have been sexually assaulted as children, they're hearing that sex education. That's not good for them either. We need to teach respect. We need to teach continuous consent. We need to teach enthusiastic consent. I agree with you there, but I don't agree that you have to traumatize and destroy a woman's life and rip out everything that she has ever done in the entirety of her life just because she wants to come forward.
Rachel Abrams is an attorney who dedicated her career to representing survivors of rideshare sexual assaults. She's recently had a huge victory when her petition was granted allowing all federally filed passenger sex assault cases against Uber into one federal court multi-district lawsuit. And Rachel says this is important so the over 10,000 Uber passengers who reported being sexually assaulted during rides have an opportunity to seek justice. So please welcome Rachel Abrams. This was a big break to get this put together in a multi-district setup. And will there be some cases designated that you'll try first that could set the bar for all the other cases?
Yeah, that is how it's routinely done. And right now, the number is growing exponentially because Uber is not implementing the safety measures they need to prevent these sexual assaults from happening. Today, we're hearing about what happens after a sexual assault has occurred. But what I'm trying to do is prevent sexual assaults from happening so that I don't have, I currently represent over 3,000 women that have been sexually assaulted by Uber drivers while using the platform.
Do you suspect that out of 10,000 cases that some of those are people just jumping on the bandwagon?
No, those are actually verified. Those are statistics by the rideshare companies themselves. The numbers are way higher than that because those numbers are skewed in their own safety reports. We believe that there's probably hundreds of thousands of sexual assaults that have happened on
Really?
platforms. Yeah, sexual assault survivors. Many don't come forward. We know about 10,000 that the companies have, in a very short period of time, come forward and said, these have happened. So imagine the number of women that have not come forward to tell their story of what happened to them.
What percentage of women riders does that represent?
We don't have the exact number, of course. It is the future of transportation. The convenience can't be understated. There's billions of rides a year, and I know what Uber will say is this is a very small percentage of the total number of rides where sexual assault occurs. But first of all, one is too many. But if they could implement safety measures like putting cameras in the vehicles that are mandatory and can't be turned off, then the significant portion of these sexual assaults would be prevented.
Uber did give a statement. Sexual assault is a horrific crime, and we take every report of this nature very seriously. And while we cannot comment on pending litigation, we are deeply committed to the safety of all users on the Uber platform. We have pioneered numerous features and policies that are standard in the rideshare industry today and continue to invest in building features to help make the platform safer. Uber further wanted to note, and this wasn't part of their statement, it's just on background, that serious incidents on the Uber platform are incredibly rare. And they say that probably 99.9% of rides are being completed without any type of reported safety incident at all. Mm-hmm. And your point is, even if that's true, that's unacceptable because that 99.9 leaves a lot of people being impacted.
That is correct, and that number is skewed. And if you take out the male riders that are part of that, and focus on female riders late at night, possibly intoxicating, using the platform for a safe ride home, that number's going to go way higher.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at, if you had an estimate of that.
And Uber has mentioned the safety features, but most of the safety features are with regards to using the phone in the car when a sexual assault is about to happen or is happening, or safety measures that they have afterwards, like hotlines to call. We're talking about prevention. All of the safety features Uber has implemented really go to after an assault happened. Let's talk about preventing them from happening by having cameras in cars and making fingerprint biometric screening for drivers mandatory. They don't do that. It's about prevention, not about what happens if it's happening to you.
Yeah. All right, my final thoughts after the break. You two have made a very compelling and understandable case about why women are reluctant to go and report. And what you're saying is, I think, that in a he said, she said, you've got to really look at the veracity of the witness, and are they a truth teller, and are they being accurate, and are they reporting it? You know, the sad fact is, your case, for example, was not a he said, she said. There was evidence that was available. There was another witness that was tied up in another room. There were fingerprints that weren't taken. So in that kind of a case, it's different than he said, she said, correct?
Correct. What happened in your case is just unimaginable. The prosecutors, the law enforcement people, everybody from the beginning should have done a better job. The problem sometimes is where we have interviewers who are leading and creating a bias and telling people that they've been injured or assaulted when they just need to let them tell their own story. So that's a problem that has to be changed, that has to be different.
But isn't it interesting that defense attorneys are charging for their services? The jury doesn't get paid. The witnesses don't get paid.
Well, people who cannot afford a private attorney, they have public defenders. And public defenders are very talented, they work very hard. So everybody that has a crime that they're charged with, they are entitled to have a defense attorney. If you can afford a private one that specializes in this area like me, then so be it. And the defamation that takes place in this person's families is incredible. If you can afford a private attorney to be able to fight for your son, to fight for your nephew, to fight for your uncle, that's what you're going to want to have. If you can't, you get a public defender, and they're supposed to do that. That's what the law requires. That's what makes the criminal justice system fair.
If the quality of service were the same, there would be no need for someone to be paid above and beyond what a public defender could provide. So the system in and of itself is weighted or favored towards someone who has the financial resources that can make them look better to a jury.
That's not what the overwhelming people who work in the system find. I've been doing this for 30 years. And I understand that it's not weighted. In fact, because of the particular accusations and because of how popular it is a problem for the defense, it's a problem for the accuser. Everybody has to come together and make sure that there is a fair playing field, that everything is put out there and everything that's vetted. So I disagree with you. I think that the system's doing the best that it can, and that everybody who's accused of these type of crimes has to be properly represented.
With all due respect, sir, every statistic and every academic article goes exactly against what you're saying. There is no equity in the law when it comes to a private attorney versus a public defender. And I say that knowing a lot of judges and public defenders and how hard they work. That is just not an accurate representation.
Well,
I'm sorry, I'd call you on that.
I can tell you, I spent a lot of my professional career in the litigation arena, and my experience has been that you're entitled to the best defense money can buy.
Precisely.
And that doesn't mean it's right. That's just how the system works. But I will say I was court appointed many times to assist public defenders. And when I came in, they were very passionate and they were very dedicated. They were incredibly overworked and underexperienced. And I often came in and said, okay, you sit over there and I got some guys with me here and take notes, and this will make you a better lawyer next time. So it's not always a level playing field.
And on the flip side, though, as the victim, we get an ADA. We don't get to even have any input into that. So the victim is up against an ADA, often overworked, often tired, often their first job, couple years out of riding depots, and they're up against 30 years of experience. You've done this hundreds of times. That's simply not fair.
Well, I also was a prosecutor the first 15 years of my practice, and I understand how difficult and challenging that can be. I think the biggest takeaway is that there are problems. This is a subjective system. The criminal justice system is not like engineering. There's not a formula that says A plus B equals C. Subjective prosecutors, subjective defense attorneys. Ultimately, if you have to go to a jury, you look for 12 impartial jurors. That's what Dr. Phil has worked on. Finding those people that can be receptive to that, finding people that don't have similar experiences so they're not biased, finding people that could be fair. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm talking about this topic. It's not a popular topic. It's not something that people are comfortable with, but it's extremely important.
And we'll have to leave it there because we're out of time. I'm glad we've had this conversation, and I think it's been an intelligent conversation on both sides. I thank everyone for being here. Rhea, Daryl, thank you so much. Rachel Abrams, thank you for sharing everything. And I really do thank Julianne for bravely telling her story tonight. I hope it's made all of you think about this. I'll leave you with this final thought. When you do go through something like this, pushing it down is not the way to go. And I'm glad you've worked at this and gotten professional help. And this is trauma. And there are special trauma therapists out there. And you should select carefully those that you choose to help you with these things. You're not ever going to forget it. And you may not ever get over it, but you will get through it. You will learn to accommodate to it. And the thing you don't want to do is feel alone, because the best thing you can do is give your feelings a voice and talk about it so you don't live alone in shame and guilt. You just need to give it a voice and talk about it. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next time.